from a defabricated garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA. This is Stand Up with Pete Dominick. On today's episode, the top 5 reasons you should probably avoid that facelift. And now, the podcast host who has no need for facelifts because his face is already lifting to the heavens, Pete Dominick!
Nailed it again, Pico. Thank you, as always, for getting us up and started. Oh, do I have a show for you today? 3, count them, 3 excellent guests joining me today. Eric Siegel will wrap up the arguments that were made at the Supreme Court yesterday, where they heard arguments in a case about a woman who doesn't want to be forced to design websites for gay people or some awful thing. The screwed up thing, of course, being that nobody asked her to. Anyway, the court prioritizes bigotry as part of their standard operating procedure now, and Eric Siegel and I went live on Twitter last night. That's the last thing on today's show. Before that, I've got the great Aaron David Miller, who I talk, another great, 15-20 minute conversation with Aaron about the Middle East, about Iran, their weapons, the uprising there, as well as everything that's happening in Israel with its hard right shift. Great conversation with Aaron David Miller. But before that, one of my all-time favorite people to talk to and to read. He's such a great writer and written so many amazing things now. A contributor to Vanity Fair, his new piece about his time in Wisconsin and all the crazy fascist flags and so much more. Jeff Sharlet joins me. So 3 excellent guests. Jeff Sharlet and I start about 15 minutes. Then I begin with Aaron David Miller at 51 minutes, if you want to jump to that. And then Eric Siegel at 1:07. Those are the time codes for all 3 guests. You are welcome for the cheat sheet. I want to briefly thank everybody who reached out with suggestions for the show. I had a couple great suggestions from our friend John Carroll, who said I should talk to Claudia Hammond about her article, Does Kindness Get in the Way of Success?, that he found in the psychology section of the BBC. Very interesting. And a few people have suggested now that I reach out to Will Bunch of the Philadelphia Inquirer, who wrote the book After the Ivory Tower Falls, How College Broke the American Dream and Blew Up Our Politics and How to Fix It, published this summer. And then Cindy reached out and suggested I talk about the issue of ageism. She said, it's ageism. It really gets under my loose skin. Cindy, very funny. She suggested a couple of guests that I should talk to about it, and I will. Thank you to all of your ideas. Send them to standupwithpete@gmail.com, as well as your vitamin N photos, any nature photos that you're taking. They can't have any man-made objects in them. Send them over, and I'll include them in the subscriber email and post that I put up late every night that hopefully you get every morning if you are a subscriber. If you're not, now is the time to join up. Standupwithpete.com. It's a free podcast. I do it every weekday and sometimes more, and it costs a lot. I need your support. I'm even hiring an intern that I'm going to pay. So please, if you could sign up for as little as $5 or more, go to standupwithpete.com right now. And speaking of great listeners, subscribers, Cassie in Las Vegas sent me this TikTok, which I thought is really good because A, I hadn't heard about this lawsuit, and B, I thought it was just a great argument. So anytime you have things that you can send me, videos, audio I can share, then do it, because then I can put it on the show and share it with everybody else. All right, this guy is talking about the news out of this lawsuit. Ron DeSantis lawyers were forced to define woke. Here he is on TikTok. What's Up CV is his TikTok handle.
Ron DeSantis' lawyers were forced to define the term woke. Republicans love to talk about wokeness and for years have even declared war on wokeness. But what is wokeness? Well, Ron DeSantis' lawyers were forced to define the term woke in court after a state attorney who was suspended for being woke sued Ron DeSantis. Ready? The word woke, as defined by the lead lawyer in court, is the following: the belief there are systemic injustices in American society and the need to address them. Woke. And for the record, there are systemic injustices in American society and we need to address them. And Ron DeSantis and his lawyers are basically saying, nah, we don't believe that. Except, of course, if you're white or Christian, because don't Republicans believe that there are systemic injustices against white Christians in this country? And if they believe that, doesn't that make them woke?
Well done. Well said. Well argued. Yeah. These folks, these white Christians think they're the ones being discriminated against and persecuted. It is a crazy idea to me, but one that was also being argued at the Supreme Court, basically, in these arguments that we heard yesterday. So we'll talk more about that with Eric Siegel. Also, just, of course, want to mention the Georgia runoff election. Shout out to Vicky and Francis, who I know were phone banking for Raphael Warnock. Although, actually, Vicky might have been phone banking for Herschel Walker. No, I'm kidding you, Vicky. I know. Here, by the way, is Raphael Warnock on the eve of the election, sitting down with MSNBC's Joy Reid.
People that have texted and called me from all over the country and about your opponent. And you know, what they feel that there's a certain amount of this election that is about the dignity, not just of the Senate, not just of the state of Georgia, but of black men, to be blunt. That people, they don't feel that there's a dignity to that campaign. Are you concerned that Herschel Walker and whatever his capacity is, his abilities are, that he is being used a bit by the other side, that the Republicans don't want him to be a senator, they want him to be a tool?
Here's what we know. We know that he is unprepared. We know he's unqualified. And it gives me no pleasure to say this, but as a preacher, I'm in the business of truth telling. He's unfit to represent the people of Georgia in the United States Senate. And we've seen that time and time again. I do think it's disgraceful for someone who's running for public office to be unwilling to tell us the truth about the basic facts of their life, telling us lies that are easily disputable. Like, we all know that Herschel Walker is not a police officer.
I mean, he had a badge.
And, yeah, well, he wears his lies as a badge of honor, literally. But we know he's not a police officer. And I think that tomorrow night, the people of Georgia are going to stand up and say, we know he's not a U.S. Senator also.
All right, there you go, Raphael Warnock, from his lips to the ears of God, who decides, of course, on these elections. It's a big deal if he wins. It matters. It matters for a lot of reasons. It matters for the Democratic bench. It matters for the 2024 elections. It also matters for judges. It's a big deal to confirm federal court judges for the Democrats in the Senate to have that power. It also means that Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin aren't going to be nearly as powerful in the U.S. Senate. Not that it really matters as much now, because the House won't be passing anything but regulating kitten litter boxes outside elementary school classrooms, because they think that's actually a thing that's happening. But it still matters. It also matters because Raphael Warnock might run for president one day. How about that? New York Times op-ed about that. Well, they were arguing all the interesting and important things for Democrats in this op-ed, why it matters if Raphael Warnock wins. So hopefully that is the case, and hopefully we'll know pretty quickly after the polls close. But it could be very close. A lot of smart people predicting that Warnock could win by 3 or 4 points, but it could be close. So hopefully Warnock wins. It would be shocking to see him lose and see Herschel Walker as a U.S. Senator. It would just be absolutely shocking and depressing and disappointing. And I hope and don't think that we will see that, but we will know soon enough. And in other news, tens of thousands are still in the dark after targeted attacks on North Carolina power substations. With no suspects or motive announced, the FBI is joining the investigation into power outages in this North Carolina county believed to have been caused by, quote, intentional and, quote, targeted attacks on substations that left around 40,000 customers in the dark Saturday night, prompting a curfew and emergency declaration. The person or persons who did this knew exactly what they're doing, said the Moore County Sheriff. We don't have a clue why. He said bullets that were fired at the two substations were targeted. It wasn't random. He wouldn't say whether criminal activity was domestic terrorism, but noted no group has stepped up to acknowledge or accept that they are the ones who did it. So tough times in the cold and the dark, and millions of dollars worth of damage is the estimation. I hopefully they can find the culprit soon. And I would argue that I don't know what kind of security cameras that these substations have, but I am concerned that this is going to be a continued threat and target for other potential terrorists or vandals or whoever did this. I'm closely watching this story. If you know anybody living down there, then send them my way. I'd like to make sure that we keep our eyes and ears on this and that we hopefully can prevent this kind of thing from happening. A lot of concern that it was done to shut down a theater that was hosting a drag show that went on apparently anyways, but yeah, scary stuff, scary times. Although over in Arizona, they certified the 2022 election results amid the threat of more GOP challengers from the crazy people like Kari Lake. But that's done deal. No matter what they want, they are not going to win there. The Biden administration expanded protections for Haitian immigrants with the announcement 110,000 Haitians in the United States could gain permission to stay for at least 18 more months, and others who have already had protections will see them extended. So I think that's a really good news story. The former disgraced President Donald Trump trying to clarify his call for termination of the parts of the Constitution amid the backlash, but nobody cares. Nobody seems to believe him, and a whole bunch of more Republicans are being critical of him and wanting him to go away. At least Republicans in the Senate being more vocal about it when asked. Now let's head over to the war in Russia, where explosions at 2 Russian air bases Monday have focused attention on Ukraine's effort to develop longer-range combat drones. So the war in Russia takes on a new look with an offensive from Ukraine inside Russia's air bases using a drone program. And speaking of Russia and Vladimir Putin, he apparently signed an expanded anti-LGBT laws in Russia, the latest crackdown on their rights there. The headline at the Bulwark: Russia to gays, shut up and disappear. Putin signing laws expanding a ban on LGBT propaganda. Russia, not a great place to be gay. Or really alive, it would seem. Doesn't seem like the greatest place. I don't want to go to Russia. Sorry to those of you that have been and have enjoyed it or that are Russian. That seems like a bad place these days. And one more story. This is the Oxford Word of the Year. Let's go to NBC News reporter.
2022 Oxford Word of the Year has been revealed, and it's actually 2 words. It's goblin mode. Here's the definition, if you haven't heard the term. It means a type of behavior which is unapologetically self-indulgent, lazy, slovenly, or greedy, typically in a way that rejects social norms or expectations. Now, this word was actually picked by the public, and it's the first time the Oxford University Press has put the Word of the Year up for a vote. And that particular one, goblin mode, captured a whopping 93% of the vote, beating out other options like hashtag I stand with and metaverse.
Now, there you go. NPR said it's mindlessly binge-watching television without worrying about the time. It's eating snacks in bed without a care about leftover crumbs. And it's wearing the same pair of pajamas all week while working from home. Welcome to Goblin Mode. Wow, I am embarrassed to say I've never even heard it. Now I'm going to use it all the time. There you go. All right, well, that's all the news I've got for you on today's recap. Brought to you by subscribers of this show. It's ad-free right now, and the only way that we're able to do it is because of listeners like you. Or not. Maybe you're not paying. Maybe sign up right now. StandUpWithPete.com if you want to support the show. And I've got this news recap and usually 2 guests today. 3 great guests joining me today. And let's get to it, shall we? Coming up, constitutional law scholar Eric Siegel recapping the arguments at the Supreme Court. Before that, Aaron David Miller on Iran, Israel, Ukraine, Russia, and more. But right now, my first guest, I'm so happy that I got to connect with him again yesterday, is Jeff Sharlet. Jeff is now a contributor to Vanity Fair, but you might know him from his books, The Family, The Secret Fundamentalism at the Heart of American Power, and C Street, The Fundamentalist Threat to American Democracy. Also the executive producer of the 5-part Netflix series, The Family. If you haven't seen that, you should. He's now a professor of the art of writing at Dartmouth College, and he knows all about it because he's such a great writer, and this piece is such a great piece in Vanity Fair. He's also contributed to just about every other major respected magazine in the country. His new book is The Undertow, Scenes from a Slow Civil War, which is where this is drawn from. He's awesome on Twitter, by the way, at Jeff Sharlet 1T, and I'm very happy to have him joining me today. I just love talking to him. He's like such a great voice. And he's so smart, and we had a great talk. I think you're going to love it. Let's do it right now with Jeff Sharlet.
Yeah, there he is. Jeff Sharlet, safe and sound. I'm always worried about you. You're out there on the road alone, standing in people's lawns taking pictures of their flags, and then I get worried, but I love your every dispatch. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for having me and making me sound so creepy. Standing in people's lawns, taking pictures of their flags.
I mean,
it is true. What I'm doing is, and this story that we're going to talk about is walking up to people's houses and taking photographs. But then we live in a moment when people are flying these very provocative fascist flags. They're saying, look at me, let's engage. So the question is, do we do so?
Right. Well, the other question, though, just is I want to get into your reporting and kind of how you do it and why you do it, because the other thing is, if it were me walking up taking those pictures, I could get away with not necessarily identifying as one of the main categories that a lot of these folks don't like, love, or want to even kill. You are pretty open with everybody in their house while their guns are out. You're like, oh, I'm Jewish. I mean, it is a fascinating and dangerous job. Plus, you're a pretty well-known guy. If anybody wanted to Google your name, tell me the rules and kind of ethics about this reporting trip and why you went to Wisconsin, kind of how you do it. Take us inside your craft, because it's really important, I think.
So I mean, it's in the book. So this is this piece in Vanity Fair, which I think on Vanity Fair online, they give it a headline. The headline they give it was like, "Fuck Biden," which is like one of the flags. And I think they did that as sort of like a trolling thing. Like, oh, the right wingers like, all right, Vanity Fair has got it. And, and then they're in. But the piece is really called Great Acceleration. It's part of this book called The Undertow, Scenes from the Slow Civil War. And what I'm trying to do is get us to think, it's an old thing, the personal is political, right? I mean, we've known that for a long time, and we still don't quite get it, right? So you always understanding those things both at the same time. So I'm in Wisconsin, not because I've decided, I've carefully studied the 50 states and picked Wisconsin as the one that is most representative. It's not. I was in Wisconsin because, to be honest, I was taking my child to a program there, a health program. So I was there for the summer with my child, and there was a lot of time that I couldn't be spending with them because they're involved in the program. So I would use that time to drive around the state. And I didn't know that Roe was going to fall while I was there, right, and that I was going to be there the day Roe fell, and I was just going to so happen be with some people who were acquainted with some people who were in the process of getting IVF. And literally, the woman was in the examining room. They're trying to bring a life in the world, and the doctor comes in crying right after the decision has come down and says, we can't go through with this. This is no longer legal. Wisconsin was the only blue state in the country in which abortion immediately became 100% illegal. It reverted to an 1849 law, which is right back at the beginning of Wisconsin, making no exceptions for abortion. So,
well, to be clear, this woman, because as you're right, this woman was pregnant with triplets. Is that the deal?
No, she wasn't. But the risk with IVF, one of the risks, and there's a number of them. And in fact, when you look at the so-called pro-life movement, which is in this case trying to stop people from conceiving, they are going to target IVF next. That's stated because more embryos are created or potentially created than are going to be used. So they're saying every one of those. So you can't do that. So in other words, if she could be, and that doctor could be guilty of murder, and all over the state, things were stopping right in the middle of that process. So I decided, okay, I'm in Wisconsin. I'm going to travel. This is now suddenly Wisconsin, which is a battleground state, has really become very unique in this way. And it was shadowed for me by this book, which gives the story its frame, called Wisconsin Death Trip, 1973 book by Michael Lesy, which is a very strange book. And Michael Lesy is a very strange man and happens to have been my mentor and teacher. And it's about the 1890s in Wisconsin. And if you know that small town Americana of the 19th century wasn't all apple pie and sweetness, and you think we always knew that actually has a lot to do with that book in 1973, which was a landmark book going back to these photo archives of a small town, Black River Falls, Wisconsin, and reading the newspaper, just the daily newspaper. And what do you find? You find arson, insanity, murder. You find infanticide, people throwing down wells. You find there's one woman who appears throughout she's the Antifa of her time, going around the state smashing windows. But in her case, nobody really knows why. She's just raging against the machine, I guess. So I went around Wisconsin to check for an update.
Well, you got one and you shared it with us, and it's fascinating and entertaining and terrifying, and we can draw conclusions from it, but I really wanted to know kind of, why Wisconsin, what you're doing there, and it clears it up now, and when you were there, because it's like interesting seeing you put together things and documenting your trip on social media, on Twitter specifically, and then seeing the articles in the book, of course. And I just am really always interested in all the reporting you're doing. So you get basically, what was the goal here? What was the project? Because you were meeting a lot of people who were inviting you into their homes and telling you their plans and allowing you to take photographs of their guns and giving you all kinds of quotes. And how do you meet these people and get invited in their home?
I mean, you knock. It's not that hard. But, the thing is, I'd driven out to Wisconsin with my kid, who's 13, and we're driving. We decided, let's make a good trip of it. Let's not drive the highways. We'll drive the smaller roads. And it was such a drumbeat of flags, of these fascist flags all across the country. And, in the story, I made the photographs of the story too. There's a grid of 9 of these fascist flags. I collected hundreds of them. And my kid, who's 13 and happens to be a non-binary kid, we're driving across the landscape, and everywhere we're seeing these flags that are targeted, not just against them as a Jew, but as a queer kid, are targeted against them at youth. I mean, this is sort of like the idea of like, we could be in civil war. They're like, but Dad, I'm everywhere where I feel like I'm in occupied territory.
Yeah.
And that, by the way, I live in Vermont. That starts literally a mile away from here, where there's a flag of Trump as Rambo with a big machine gun, Yeah. So I was curious about these flags. And when I was not with my child, I wouldn't do this with my child. I would stop and I would knock. And the first sort of the big centerpiece of the story is the family Brum, the Brum family of Marinette, Wisconsin.
They're amazing.
And, part of what's interesting is Wisconsin and Michigan are big militia states. They're sort of one of the centers. And I stumbled onto the commander through no intention. I was just wandering. And I see this flag that says fuck Trudeau, which is unusual in Wisconsin. Usually it's fuck Biden or some variation thereof, of which there are really just sort of endless variations that they've made on these flags. So I stopped to take a picture, and this woman just pops right out, and she's not rude. She's not friendly. She wants to know what I'm doing on her lawn, taking a picture of her window, which is a pretty reasonable question, actually. Yeah. And I say, I'm a journalist. I make pictures. And she said, my husband's a photojournalist too. And he comes out, and it's Rob Brum, big guy. And I think there's a lot of stereotypes of all militia guys as overweight and out of shape and so on. No, Rob's a big, fit guy. And he's got a 45 on his hip, and he's all in camouflage. And I tell him what I'm doing, photographing the fuck Trudeau flag. And he says, well, I've got 2. Do you want one? So, like, what's the right answer there?
I think the answer is absolutely.
Oh, thank you, sir. And he says, come inside. And, when someone with a gun, whose lawn you are trespassing on, and little did you know you had tripped off multiple motion sensors, and that they considered themselves as having 3 sort of peripheries, all marked. They're in constant combat mode. I had already crossed 2 of them without knowing it. They knew it. You go in, and I walk in, and the center room, it's a very crowded house. There's a bunch of kids, but there's a pool table covered with ARs, ammunition, handguns, long guns. There's a big TV up on the screen in the corner playing on loop footage of January 6th, which turns out to be a footage that Rob, who was a wedding videographer, had shot. He was a J6er himself, a January 6er himself. There is not only the fuck Trudeau flag, there's the don't tread on me flag, and there is the scariest flag you can see in America right now, which is the all black American flag of no mercy, no quarter. And what that flag stands for is in the coming civil war that folks believe is happening. It means you take no prisoners. There are no prisoners. You just kill everyone on the other side. It's an exterminationist flag. So there's a lot of guns, a lot of flags, and lucky for me, 4 cats.
Because you're allergic.
No, because cats are cute. And
I thought you were being. Did I know you were a cat?
I said, Rob, can I take a picture of your cat? The cat's sitting there by the AR. Says, the cat's name is Twitch.
But it's wild because the pictures are in the article. You have to see. I mean, Jeff is an awesome photographer, and you've got to just obviously read the article. But the photography, it's like he didn't invite a reporter over and set up this room and throw on J6. He just he invited you in, and that's how that room normally looks. And apparently, the insurrection is just on a loop in his house, and that's and then you find out. He's the leader of a local militia that he claims has, 6,700 people. Later, you talked to him on the phone because you followed up, apparently. 7,500 people. You write, are the numbers real? Inflated, perhaps, but maybe also real enough.
They were real enough in the sense that I saw enough evidence that whether there are many thousands, there are definitely hundreds. And there's definitely uniforms and everything else. And they're doing, night training exercise. But Pete, you actually hit on a point there. I wish it wasn't too late. I could go and revise this and add this in. You say, it's not like he was prepping. He just had those guns on the table and the insurrection playing on a loop. And you're right. That's exactly it. The metaphor is the insurrection playing on a loop. It's always, the apocalypse is always now. The insurrection is always now. And part of the reason he let me in, by the way, is he's so prepared to be arrested. And his line is, if they call me and say, I need to be arrested, I will go in peacefully. If they show up at my door, well, you see what he's got inside. And he says, all the guns on the table. He says, can I photograph this? He says, oh yeah. Everything you can see is legal, right. And that's sort of his coy thing. I said, Rob, were you packing on January 6th? Because he always carries. And he says, well, let's just put it this way. I didn't get mugged in Washington, D.C., which is in the racist imagination. The only way a white man could not get mugged in Washington, D.C. is if he's carrying a gun.
Which is, by the way, the same thing I always say, but I'm not carrying a gun. I just want to keep you guessing. I mean, what do you tell this guy?
I've also been in Washington, D.C. quite a bit my whole life. I've never been mugged. What's going on here? This is crazy.
Well, look at me. I look dangerous, I think.
I do, yeah. It's the baldness.
What? Yeah, exactly. It's always creepy. What are the rules that he know? What does he ask about you? What did he, does he know that you're writing for Vanity Fair and he might be included in this article? Does he want the PR?
I think let's face it. There's people flying fascist flags all over the country right now.
That's what I'm saying. It's like they're not hiding.
You put up a flag with an AR-15 on it, as I encountered in many places. There's the white flag with an AR-15 that says "Come and take it." There's flags across AR-15s. There's an American flag, which is it's white and the stripes are AR-15s and the stars are Glocks. So all these gun flags. You put up a flag like that, you are both warning, but you're also inviting. Like you're not trying to fade in, right? So I think there's an element of that. And I think he sort of said, look, you might be a Fed. I don't care. You might be a real writer. You might not. You might be a Fed. He had been a journalist. That was what was interesting. He had on his wall, in fact, awards from the AP for his photojournalism. And so he knew the drill. I mean, he was even well, the lighting in here is bad. Let me turn on the lights for you and, help you out a little bit. He knew more about lighting than I did.
Well, the most fascinating things of all the things you might be, but you found out he might be a Jew. Not really, but generations removed. Like you wrote some sense about, he's had 9 generations of Christianity between him and and whatever Poland.
Well, he had decided to be a Jew, and that was what was interesting. And that was, oftentimes too, some of these guys with flags are just sullen, right? Some of these guys with flags are guys with a lot of opinions. And maybe the people in their life are tired of hearing all those opinions. But a writer comes up and is willing to talk. Rob wanted to talk. And then when he found out I was a Jew, he was even more excited. Rob was from this small town in Wisconsin. And he had discovered through some genealogical research that his 19th century ancestors, whom he had always thought were Lutherans, he had been raised as a Lutheran, may in fact have been Jews who decided in the New World to pass because, why sign up for that shit again? And so he had decided to become a Jew as well. And he was sort of interested in like figuring out some Yiddish. And he was very self-taught. What was complicated about it was, and I say this, some people say, this family isn't representative of Wisconsin. And I'm like, no, it's really not. The head of the militia with an arsenal of guns run by a Jew who says that his militia is anti-Semitic, but they respect him because he's the alpha wolf, whose wife says she's a Druid and whose daughter is a Nazi. His daughter, Athena, is sitting there. And, well, she complains when people call her a Nazi. It's complicated. She's got a big German flag. She's definitely not Jewish. She rejects that 100%. Big German flag tattoo with the Iron Cross.
Yeah,
well,
but it's Imperial German. It's not. You explain. She explains it different. She has a good. Listen, this whole family is fascinating. You write a lot about them, but as you said, this isn't necessarily
the 3-year-old who's already training with an AR.
It's. I was so glad that the article took a turn away from that family because I was getting scared and more like upset by it. But yeah, the 3-year-old, he's arguing that Athena first held a gun 2.5, he says, and she corrects him and says 2. It's how?
She learned on the Dirty Harry gun, which he picked up and racked. I mean, he had been 82nd Airborne. He knew how to handle guns. At the same time, he was demonstrating them very freely. There was lots of gun pointing.
You're crazy for going in there, but I'm glad that you did, and I'm glad that you did.
They offered me pizza. It was nice, but it was taco pizza, which I'm not going to eat. That was
really? Are you like a vegetarian or something anyway?
Yeah. There's no way I was going to eat that. But to be polite in another situation, I might have said yes, but taco pizza.
I'll take you say yes to the fuck Trudeau flag, but you draw the line at the taco pizza. But I think that's understandable if you want to get the story.
But so this is a remarkable family. But the thing is, you then drive down the road. Yeah. And it's the same guy. They're just not as articulate, And so the story becomes this drumbeat of these folks, each with their own different idea. Because I'm talking to them about Roe. So for instance, Rob, he's like, I actually don't care. He's sort of a libertarian. However, we must outlaw abortion because, and this is his logic, which I discovered, in fact, he didn't make it up himself. This is a thing on the right. He said black women have abortions at a higher rate than white women. This is true. He had a wildly inflated number.
Yeah.
And his idea was that black people were cannon fodder necessary for a future war with China. He says, I can't spare those black bodies. That's his line for my front line. You go down the road and each guy has his own profoundly biologically naive, like none of these men had any idea how reproduction worked. I mean, if this could have been a story that is the case for sex ed in the Midwest, I mean, they needed to know some things about.
And they clearly don't understand statistics and demographics and economics, and they're not paying very close attention to actually China and what's happening with their economy. I mean, it's not really well thought out, but it's the kind of right-wing talk radio theory of replacement theory or whatever version of it, and then add it to a future war with a future aggressor, in this case China, because they're having tons of babies, but it's just not very thought out. It's just a good.
I would disagree with you there, Pete. And I think this is actually, to me, what's the alarming thing, right? So, as I'm traveling across the country, we're seeing all these fascist flags. I'm trying to reassure my 13-year-old. And whenever we pull into a city, what do you see? You see pride flags, lots of pride flags. There are probably more pride flags flying in America than there are these fascist flags. but they're very concentrated. It's very geographically divided. But here's the other thing that my kid and I both noticed. The pride flag, it's pretty much always the same pride flag or the same Black Lives Matter sign. You buy it, it's mass produced. There must be 150 variations of fascist flags. And then that's not counting all the ones that people make themselves, the banners, this Americana evil folk art of fascism. And what that shows is, yes, they're receiving the signal, but they are thinking about it, not in a way of deep understanding, but they're spinning their own variations on it. In fact, it feels important to them to add something to it, like the number of guys, for instance, speaking of the news, who talked to me about Elon Musk, right? They've been thinking about this. This is before Elon Musk had bought Twitter.
Yeah.
They were thinking about Elon Musk, the inventor, one fascist who says a civil war is going to lay waste to the world. He's been watching Terminator too many times. But fortunately, Elon Musk is going to settle Mars for us. And I don't know if you saw that literally this morning, Elon Musk tweeted about settling Mars. They're all in the same fantasy world, but they all experience themselves as in some ways thinking for the first time in their lives. They're making shit up and they are falling for lies and they are indulging in hate. But it's important to understand what they think they're doing and to understand that critical mass of energy. Like it disturbs me that on the left, I don't see the same creativity and leftist folk art. I do in some places as I travel across the country. I do in a lot of Black neighborhoods where I will see a lot of really great anti-fascist art in one way or another. But elsewhere, no, it's nothing. And it's because we're still assuming that we're the center of things, as opposed to this is spinning out. This is centrifuging. We are approaching civil war. I don't say we have to get there, but I have no question that we're approaching it for no other reason than everybody I spoke to thought it was coming.
You think that your work and your writing right now, your journalism, is doing a really good job uncovering what these folks are thinking, what their desires are, what their impulses, their motivations, what their war, their version of it is. And you think that that's really important to scream from the mountaintops that this is happening, this is who they are. What is that what you think?
I mean, to a certain extent, I do it a little bit because I find it weirdly reassuring that I can go out and I can still go out and find out things. And that's changed. I think we talked about a piece I had in Vanity Fair last summer in which, for the first time in my life, I had a gun pointed at me at a church in the United States. But that I can still
that's why I worry about you a lot.
Well, I look, I mean, I'm no tough guy. I have rules, guidelines about how to do this. But I think it's that, but also take the measure of things. And, this story in the magazine version and in the book version more, there's a longer section, sort of almost the second half is, I don't want to say the other side. I just want to say another side.
Which I want to get to, and talk about Waukesha. Is it Waukesha?
Not in Waukesha.
Black River.
Black River Falls. Yeah, I did go to Waukesha, which is, Wisconsin's kind of, I mean, there is, like, I was in Wisconsin by accident, but Wisconsin turns out to be the right place to be. There's a book out that I recommend called How Civil Wars Start by political scientist Barbara F. Walter, who, working with this international team of political scientists, they studied every civil war they could of the last 30 years or so. And as political scientists do, sort of boiling it down, looking for common factors. And they've been doing this for years. And the United States has recently crossed over to, doesn't mean we're going to have a civil war. It means we are definitely in the category where it's quite possible. In her final chapter, she says, okay, what would it even look like? Where does she start? Wisconsin. And partly because it's a very purple state. It's about evenly divided, but it's wildly segregated. Milwaukee is the second most segregated city in America, and it's wildly gerrymandered. You got a purple state with, no exaggeration, literally a truly fascist state legislature. And that's explosive. And Black River Falls, I get there, and it's explosive all around. It's not just the right. I come into town, Black River Falls, little town in sort of eastern central Wisconsin. And there on the bridge over the Black River is this young woman, these three young women holding signs. One's got a sign that says, "Your misogyny is showing." And it's a great, great sign. And I get to talking to them. And they're just local teens, college and high school. And the local anti-abortion preacher had come out and had been screaming at them. And so their friends came to support them. A cheerleader. I'm so proud I got this in Vanity Fair. This photograph of a cheerleader for the Black River Falls Tigers. And she has made her sign, her protest sign, and it says, bright red letters, "Fuck off."
Yeah.
And that is her message essentially to the preacher, you, me, all of us older folks who have failed. She's like, I'm about to go out into the world, and now I don't have my freedom. And, if you can't respect my rights, fuck off. I ended up spending a lot of time with these kids, and they were the most wholesome group you could imagine. Student body presidents and all this and so on, and really nice kids. We went to Perkins, and they had big piles of pancakes like you do with a teenager. But then it kind of turns to revolution and civil war. I said, a lot of the people I've been talking to think there's going to be a civil war, and I expect them to be stunned and horrified. They're like, we're ready. And this being Wisconsin, rural Wisconsin, they all know how to shoot.
Yeah.
Some of them know how to shoot really well, and they're looking forward to it. They say this is a foregone conclusion. We're ready for the war. One of them's going into the Navy. She's like, I need to, she hopes the Navy will be on the right side for whatever. She's going to learn combat training. And I find this both hopeful and scary. Mostly hopeful. The hearts were good. They weren't the ones who were menacing people with guns. Scary too, though, because it had come to the point. We as adults had failed them so badly that they see the need to take up arms to defend themselves. And I don't have a solution for that. I'm not like one of these people who's going to come in and say, here's the correct next step for the campaign or whatever and so on. I'm just looking at that and saying, you said, why do I do this? I'm like, yeah, we need to look at that. And whatever bubble you're in, and there are many, we've got to look beyond them. And I hope someone smarter than me looks and says, okay, here's what we do.
Well, you're doing it. Great job documenting it. These young people are really inspiring. I love this. As always, your photography is awesome. To partner with your brilliant prose and research, and somehow your ability to get in just about any room and get just about anybody to talk to you and share their story in the most honest of ways. And everybody's got to get the book, The Undertow, and read this article in Vanity Fair. But before I let you go, what do you make of recent events? You're always tweeting about things. First of all, I mean, how have you seen Twitter change in the last few weeks since Elon is on there, and have you made any decisions about how you're going to use it, not use it, etc.?
Well, I signed on to Mastodon. I got a Substack going, but I'm pretty tech illiterate, so mainly I'm on Twitter because I can't figure out the other platforms, and also because if this is going to become the night. Like, I'm also on Parler and Gab and all those kinds of things because I want to see what's going on. So if Twitter is going to become that, I would be there. But I do think it's actually a contested space. I think it's complicated. I don't think we have too many questions left about, practically speaking, who Elon is.
Okay, go ahead then. Answer. Who is he?
I want to say I don't really care about his personal motives or what's driving him. That's not my concern. Okay. That's not my business. You know, practically speaking, he is servicing fascism. Whether he understands that or not, and people sort of, I think, waste a lot of time trying to figure out motives and so on. It doesn't matter. That's what's happening. You can look at it. You read his Twitter feed. He is in daily dialogue with a lot of figures of the far right. And that makes him a figure of the far right. Whether or not, again, he understands himself. Some people say, well, he was always this and I always knew it. And here's the important thing. No, he wasn't. What he was before, we know this. We know this from his spending. He was a technocratic center-right Democrat, right? Not particularly. He was sort of whatever.
You kind of knew him. I just always, I tried his issue with renewable energy and electric cars, and he did talk about it as a way to kind of save the planet. Obviously, rockets and exploration. Like, if you just looked at some of the products he's behind, you'd be like, oh, I'm glad this guy's doing this. And then when you look like behind the curtain a little bit, you're like, good God, this man is a crazy person.
He is, but he wasn't this. And I think what's fascinating to me is another article, by the way, I'll recommend is, and I wish I could remember the title, Catherine Joyce's in Salon, about huge crack up between two big factions of the right now. And it includes this really fascinating part. I don't know, did you see that magazine Compact? It was supposed to be sort of like this left-right, this brown-red magazine, fascist, communist. No. And it's a bunch of sort of the prominent fascist, or not all fascist and far-right intellectuals with a bunch of, former leftists and even a Marxist editor. And the Marxist editor who's like, well, we agree on class, so let's talk about this. But he ended up realizing pretty quickly, and it was funded, I think, by Peter Thiel. The Marxists sort of like realized, like, I feel so naive. I was really wrong. I didn't understand that what fascism right now is, it's a black hole. It has incredible gravity and it's pulling things in. And as it pulls more in, its strength grows. And I look at Elon Musk in that light because he reminds me so much of a lot of the folks I've written about and talked to who weren't necessarily far right. They were just addled, who then gravitate toward that. He looks like someone who's gone down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And I think about it, it's one thing to get an incel from the basement and, to have gravity enough, strong enough. It's another thing to get a billionaire or several billionaires lately with their own force fields. I mean, their own gravity fields. That shows us that the black hole of fascism is building strength. And it doesn't do us any good to say, oh, Elon Musk was always a jerk. We should be terrified as hell that it's got enough strength to pull him in.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great analysis. It's hard to.
Are you staying on Twitter?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
and you've been through the worst of it on Twitter, right?
Yeah, I've been through the worst of it a couple times. I think the worst is being called a pedophile, being accused of, committing crimes and stuff you haven't committed. I guess a pretty bad thing, but, and the threats and stuff. But I shouldn't say the worst of it because, like, my friend Mara Quint and like so many other women and Jewish people, I mean, like, it's daily and it's the kind of different kind of hatred and threats that they then like track, so I would, for someone in my lane, in public, but I like it still in terms of connecting with people and reading. Like, I like to know where you're at and what you're doing, Jeff Sharlet, and so many other people. Like, I think it's a great place to connect with people. And so it's still working that way for me. I am worried about it, obviously, and how it gets manipulated. And
Mastodon's not going to work that way. It's not designed to work that way. And I worry about that in the sense, Mastodon seems to me, the piece is called Great Acceleration, which is began as a Marxist term and is now this right-wing term, this fascist term. Like, let's speed it up. What can we do to get the separation faster?
Yeah.
Mastodon feels to me inadvertently accelerationist, but then so does Elon. So where do you go? And you can say, I'll drop out altogether, but that's the speed up as well.
It's really hard to know where to go right now in terms of social media. It's a really confusing time, but I certainly think it's something that we should just keep talking about in the spaces and places that we do feel safe talking about, which is why I'm always psyched that you joined me here in my shed.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're out there you're continuing to do great work, Jeff. And it's really valuable, the work that you do. It's really meaningful, and I love reading it, and I certainly love getting to talk to you about it. So keep going, man.
Thanks, Pete. Likewise.
All right, there you go. There he goes, Jeff Sharlet. Everybody follow him on Twitter, at Jeff Sharlet. Get his new book, The Undertow, get his old books, watch his Netflix series, The Family, and let him know that you heard him here on the show. Always great. So great to talk with him. I hope you liked it and that you'll let him know. But now it's time to get to my second guest on today's show. Still coming up, Eric Siegel on yesterday's Supreme Court argument. But right now, it's time for my latest conversation with Aaron David Miller, who I just caught up with. Aaron, of course, is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which focuses on U.S. foreign policy. He's written 5 books, including his most recent, The End of Greatness, Why America Can't Have and Doesn't Want Another Great President, which he published back in 2014. Between 1978 and 2003, Aaron David Miller served at the State Department as a historian, analyst, negotiator, and advisor to Republican and Democratic secretaries of state, where he helped formulate U.S. policy on Middle East and Arab-Israel peace process. Most recently as a senior advisor for Arab-Israeli negotiations. The guy is awesome to talk to about this stuff. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, former president of Seeds of Peace, a global affairs analyst for CNN. His articles appear in New York Times, Washington Post, and all of the rest. And I'm always happy when I get the opportunity to talk to him. I think you're going to learn a lot and like our conversation. So let's do it right now with Aaron David Miller, who, by the way, is also on Twitter, while that's still a thing, at Aaron D. Miller 2, at Aaron D. Miller 2. Oh, and Aaron was wearing a Michigan sweatshirt because he was a student at Michigan. I asked him about it. You were there from when to when?
I was there from 69 to 77. Were you even born yet?
I was born in 1975 in Syracuse, New York.
Unbelievable. I mean, one thing I can say about old age beats the alternative.
I am now recording. That is sage advice from Aaron David Miller. Thank you, sir, for joining me. And I always love to talk to you. It's great to see you. You look great. You're in your Michigan gear. Well, let me ask you about something you have a lot of thoughts and analysis and expertise on regarding the Middle East. I want to ask you about what's going on in Israel with their domestic politics. But first, before I get to that and your piece that you co-wrote in the Washington Post with former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Daniel Kurtzer, is that right? Is that who he is? But
that's right.
I want to ask you about Iran, because not only are we seeing, obviously, this cultural uprising over women's gender equality rights, and people are familiar with at least the what's happening to some extent there, I'm sure, listening. But more importantly, something that people aren't maybe paying as much attention to, but certainly you are, about nuclear weapons, the talks, the JCPOA, and the status of it. I haven't been following it. You are concerned, to say the least.
I am, because I think over the last several years, since Mr. Biden's predecessor unilaterally withdrew from an imperfect agreement, but an agreement that was functional. It was, in fact, restraining and constraining Iran's capacity to develop enough fissile material. Once out of that agreement, there really was no, other than returning to it, which has proven very problematic, there are no longer any real safeguards on Iran's nuclear program, and should they choose to weaponize, on their efforts to produce a nuclear weapon. And I think we're heading into a very dangerous period, Pete, because I do not see under any circumstances, given events over the last 2 months in Iran, and given Iranian efforts to supply not only advisors, but drones and surface missiles to the Russian military, even if the Iranians came back tomorrow, we want to sign up to the agreement. We no more negotiations. We'll meet most of your concerns. You met a few of ours. I don't know if the administration politically, frankly, is in a position to enter into an agreement which would allow the Iranians to sell oil at a time when they're killing their own citizens on the streets and helping Putin to kill Ukrainians. I think that's become increasingly fraught. And while I do believe it is in the national interest of the United States to find a way to restrain Iran's nuclear program, I'm not sure that this agreement any longer is a feasible vehicle to do that. So, yeah. Plus, we haven't talked about the advent of the soon-to-be formed Netanyahu government, which is going to, I think, adopt a very assertive policy, have many political or diplomatic options open, it looks to me like we're headed for a confrontation.
Let me ask you about that then. It's crazy what's going on. I thought Netanyahu had lost and was being investigated. And as I read your article at the Post, the parallels between Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu in terms of what is going on with the investigation into them and how they are using politics to get away with it are crazy congruent. How is Bibi Netanyahu anywhere near power so much that he's basically, I think you wrote, midwifing this Israeli government?
Yeah, whoever thought that indicting a sitting prime minister or was somehow going to create such a fraught reputational hit for the former prime minister that he would never come back to power, that has proven to be absolutely wrong. I might note that the current president of Brazil, Lula da Silva, was also indicted and convicted and actually served X number of months before the Supreme Court set aside his charges. So you had two examples of how indicting a Brazilian and an Israeli leader did not hurt their political reputations at all. Now, I don't want to connect the dots here, but, it worries me. Who knows whether Mr. Trump will be indicted? But I find it curious in these countries which have an increasingly illiberal sort of bent that these things don't seem to matter. Well, look, it's not a popularity contest, Israeli politics. You got to have enough coalition partners. No single Israeli party has ever been the government of the state of Israel. It's always been coalition. You need 60 plus 1. And the reality is that Mr. Netanyahu has more natural coalition partners among the ultra-religious parties and among the rise of this new religious Zionist movement, whose combined sensibilities are anti-democratic, Jewish supremacists, anti-misogynist, homophobic, anti-Arab, racist. Now, within a matter of weeks, will probably sit with Mr. Netanyahu in the newly formed government of Israel. Israel's never been here before, and neither has any administration in dealing with this kind of Israeli government.
And just to be clear, the adjectives that you use describe the extreme right there in Israel are adjectives that the moderates and left wing in Israel use also to describe them, right? Like there's a wide variety of ideology in Israel, but the people who seem to have been able to form a coalition and government continue to be, and now as you're writing and I'm learning, really, really extreme in terms of who they are, where they've been, and what it looks like they want to accomplish with their new held power. Tell me who they are and why it matters.
Well, one, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who has been indicted several times, convicted, was too radical even to serve in the Israeli military. Until relatively recently, he had a picture hanging in his house of Dr. Baruch Goldstein, an Israeli who murdered 29 Palestinians who were praying in a mosque in Hebron. He also ripped the hood ornament off of the late Prime Minister Rabin's car, his Cadillac, his car, and said, "We'll get to him eventually."
Right, and this they did. He was assassinated.
The Prime Minister was assassinated. So Ben-Gvir he's charismatic. He appeals largely to obviously the Israeli right and many religious or messianic Zionists who think that the redemption of the West Bank is somehow promised to Jews by God. And he is now going to be the minister in a newly created position for national security. He will also oversee both the border police and Israel's civil police. And it's remarkable to me. Today, believe it or not, he went to it's Emirati Independence Day. He went to the UAE's embassy in Tel Aviv, where he was warmly welcomed. So go figure. The UAE is one of the signers of the Abraham Accords, something that Mr. Netanyahu with a lot of help from the Trump administration, and the head of the UAE formulated in September of 2020. And it's been a remarkable process of normalization between Israel and this tiny Gulf principality.
Yeah.
So it's a bundle of contradictions, and we'll see exactly what the new government looks like when it's formed. But it's not a pretty picture. And Mr. Netanyahu doesn't have a slim majority. He has 64 seats in the Knesset, which will allow him to pass legislation that will either postpone or even nullify the 3 indictments that he is now under and his ongoing trial.
You guys use this quote from a book called Green Mantle about a British-German-Turkish spycraft during World War I that reads, "There's a hot wind blowing through the east and the parched grasses await the spark." John Buchan wrote it.
Yeah, that quote sums it up.
Yeah, it does.
I think we're in for a very rough ride. And I guess the only thing that remains to be seen, at least on the American side, is how the Biden administration, preoccupied with many other foreign policy priorities, is going to react.
The main foreign policy priority, I would probably say, is what's happening in Ukraine, obviously everything in China, and we could name countries throughout the world. But I wanted to get there at some point with you before I wrap up with the great Aaron David Miller to talk about your thoughts on what is happening in this war that has been going on for 10 months, and what a turn of events that so many people could not have predicted. But I guess really underestimating the will, the strength of the Ukrainian people and the continued support that they're getting in the form of resources of all types, including weapons, from most of the rest of the world. What do you say about where this conflict is today?
I mean, I think 10 months in, there's no indication to me whatsoever that either party is willing to come to a negotiating table with any sort of framework on which they could both agree. Russian aggression against Ukraine and Russian losses on the military side, problems with command and control, problems with supply and logistics, incompetency in so many respects, does not change the reality that Putin, in my judgment, cannot afford to lose, and right now has no intention, even though he's stalemated on the battlefield, no intention other than resorting to these cruise missile drone strikes against Ukrainian infrastructure and civilian population centers, which is going to already making for a horrible winter for the Ukrainian public. Because the missiles are hitting their energy. I mean, they don't have any heat. Exactly. Their energy grid. And that also includes in some places, since electricity often powers water pumps, you end up with a situation in which the basic necessities of life are not readily available. It takes about $5 billion a month to sustain the Ukrainian government, aside from the almost $20 billion that the United States alone has forked up with respect to military assistance. But I see no break in this, Pete. I really don't. I think it will continue until both sides either sense that they've gotten about as much as they can, both Ukrainian defending and trying to regain territory that was taken by an aggressive foreign power, and Putin to the point where the war is threatening his leadership. And I just don't see either of those things happening anytime soon.
And what do you think of the Biden administration's handling of all of these foreign policy issues 2 years in? I mean, we could also, of course, talk with you about domestic policy and politics as well. But you wrote a book about leadership and had doubts about whether or not there would ever be another great American leader. How do we evaluate him and his administration, maybe more importantly, that seem to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting on foreign policy to start?
I mean, I think in the wake of Afghanistan, the truth is, had Afghanistan been the final coda on the administration's foreign policy, Joe Biden would have gone down as one of the worst foreign policy presidents, even though I think he corrected in the first year or so of his administration some of the breaches of American credibility and trust that the Trump administration was responsible for. But I think I would argue to you
and that the Bush administration was responsible for it, talking about Afghanistan too, really.
Yeah, well, the decision to invade Iraq and to lose sight of what our objectives were in Afghanistan is on Bush 43. But I would say that Ukraine has provided, Putin has basically given Biden an opportunity to demonstrate some rather formidable and skillful foreign policy chops. I can't remember as deft an alliance management as any that I have experienced, with the possible exception of what Bush 41 and James Baker, for whom I worked, did in response to Saddam's invasion of Kuwait. This has been, in fact, this is more complicated than that. American forces are not involved. But I think the Biden administration has done extremely well in maintaining alliance integrity, avoiding a major confrontation with the Russians. Let's face it. That was hugely important, and supporting Ukrainian sovereignty. I give them remarkably high marks. And Biden deserves enormous credit. I can only imagine if you had taken Biden out of this situation and put any number of American presidents in there, I'm thinking most obviously about Donald Trump, that the American response would have been much different. And our interests and Ukraine's interests would have suffered, and Russian interests, I think, would have benefited. So I give Biden a lot of credit on the foreign policy side.
Well, can I tell you, I give you great credit. I give you great grades on this conversation. I'll let you go unless you have any more time to answer any more questions at all. I know.
No, I would only say two things. Yeah. I hope that Michigan ends up beating Purdue Saturday night in national playoffs. And I'll leave you with one minor thought. Think positive, Pete, and test negative.
Aaron David Miller, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome, Pete.
All right, there he goes. Always a pleasure. I always learn a lot in my conversations with Aaron. He's always very good to me. On Twitter, Aaron D. Miller 2, I should say, on Twitter. And let him know that you heard him here, and always great. And I also went live yesterday on Twitter, speaking of which, it's still a thing, with my friend Eric Siegel, who's huge on TikTok, by the way, host of the Supreme Myths podcast. He was on the show yesterday giving us the preview of the arguments that we would hear today at the Supreme Court. And oh, was it bad? Yeah, it was bad. And so I reached out to Aaron. Rather, I reached out to Eric, and we went live on Twitter last night. So I thought I would just tag today's show with my conversation that I had with him recapping yesterday's hearings. And I was glad he was available. Here it is, the recap from last night, yesterday's Supreme Court hearings. The legal eagle, Eric Siegel. We should be live on Twitter now with Professor Eric Siegel. There he is, in the dark, in his home, in front of a painting.
Hey, you asked me to be on here live and retweet at the same time, and you should know that someone of my generation, those two things, it's hard.
Don't play dumb. You're a massive hit on TikTok, everybody.
I don't know why.
Go check Eric Siegel's videos over on TikTok where he puts the camera down towards his lap and it's just looking up at his face.
Sarah and Kai, my 15 and 13-year-olds, they mock me.
Yes.
Because of where I put the camera. They mock me. My kids
Well, I'm mocking you because there's no light, but I don't care. We can hear you and we can see you. We know that you're there. You're living. And we're very happy to be talking to you live on Twitter about today's arguments at the Supreme Court, which we talked about on today's episode of Stand Up. Of course, you were watching it. You were live tweeting it because you can hear the arguments. But
I wasn't watching it. I'm not allowed to watch it. Fuck, shit.
Right. Well, they don't. We already worked one in, folks. Every fuck, shit we get tonight, we're going to give away a coupon. You know
what else, Peter, makes me mad? I had to fight with someone today on Twitter who was saying these arguments shouldn't be live streamed at all. They should wait 3 hours. And I'm not going to rehearse all the arguments why they should be live streamed and put on television. But this makes me so mad. I had to say, listen, it's a taxpayer-funded argument that is open to the public that C-SPAN is willing to televise and stream at no expense to the court. It's a public argument, people. Sorry, the rant.
303 Creative is where the coupon goes.
Coupon?
303 Creative is a web designer, and that's who we're giving coupons out today to. I'm joking. You lost it completely. The 303 Creative versus Elenis is the case.
Yes, that's the case.
And I was giving them business just now.
Oh, I see. We're not giving them business.
We are not. No, because this is a case.
Despicable.
All right. Are you ready to just unload? It's a case testing whether the free speech rights of a web designer who wants to withhold her services from gay couples is in violation of that state, Colorado, public accommodation law, right?
So the first thing I'm going to say is something, because I love you, Pete, no other legal scholar has said either today or my guess is in the last month leading up to the case. And that may sound like, well, then Siegel's going to say something crazy. I'm not going to say something crazy. You and I have talked about this case and cases like it now for years, and they're hard. This is a hard case today. She is a web design person. I think there's artistic expression in what she does for her wedding sites, and she does not want the government to make her express her view. Okay, that's a fair argument. The government says, Colorado says, wait a minute. The thing is, non-discrimination law goes way back. Places of public accommodations like restaurants and theaters have had a common law duty to take everybody forever. You're basically a public accommodation. And we have a compelling, strong interest in fighting discrimination against marginalized groups like LGBTQ people. Hard case. Here's the thing, Pete. Whatever happened to states' rights? Whatever happened to federalism? It turns out very few states have Colorado-type law. Colorado's type law that protects LGBTQ people from discrimination. Some states do. Many do not. The majority do not.
Right.
So Colorado is saying we have two conflicting principles. We believe in freedom of speech. You know, I know the people who wrote this law, they believe in freedom of speech. It's a thing. But we also believe in fighting discrimination. Sometimes those two things come to a head. For example, there's a famous Supreme Court case involving a barbecue place where the people made a religious objection to serving black people. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. You're offering food to the public. Now, making food isn't the same as designing a website, maybe, but that's a different conversation. What I want to say is this. There is not a syllable today in today's arguments, and I don't think I saw anywhere in the amicus briefs, maybe there's one, that talks about the federalism parts of this. Because the answer is not clear, and it's not a clear answer. And there are liberals on both sides, and there are conservatives on both sides. It's not an easy case. Why don't we just say, well, Colorado gets to decide this, not 9 lawyers sitting in Washington, D.C. That's how this case should be decided. No one else said that today. It's a scoop for you. But
no one else is making the point that the Supreme Court should not be making this decision. It should be a state-level decision by the state.
It's a reasonable call. It's a hard case and a reasonable call. So let the voters decide. That's one thing.
So point number 1, the Supreme Court shouldn't even be looking at this case. Point number 2, Siegel.
Well, they could be looking at it. They should have said Colorado wins. Point number 2 is everybody should read Dahlia Lithwick's column that came out a few hours ago on Twitter for the so Dahlia, of course, is, I think, simply the best writer who writes about the Supreme Court. And there's a lot of humor. When I say humor, awful things happened today at this argument, and you can read all about them in Dahlia's column. Somehow Sam Alito decided to talk about black kids in Santa Claus outfits, which is still kind of making my mind go crazy. He also, and Dahlia didn't talk about this, but he cited Josh Blackman. And Alito did that for a very specific reason that so far I haven't seen picked up on. Josh, who I once really liked and respected, went off the deep end like 5 years ago. And he is now he once argued that Reformed Jews have no right to religious exemptions under the law. For some reason, he's Jewish, but he's religious Jewish. He is now a crazy person, and Alito singled him out for a reason, because he is a symbol of the religious right and of he's Jewish, but he's a symbol of the craziness of that side of the equation. Right. So that was kind of crazy. Here's something that
just
you and I
the fact that he cited his writing, okay.
It's Alito being a culture warrior, which he was throughout the entire hearing. So there was not a syllable not a single question about the original meaning of the First Amendment. This is a First Amendment case. The plaintiff is saying, I win because of the First Amendment. Wouldn't you think the 5 justices who identify as originalists would try to discuss the question, how did the original meaning of the First Amendment apply? Because this is not a case where the government is censoring speech in the political marketplace. It's not a case of involving, obscenity or something. It's clearly a different kind of free speech case. And the government is making her say something she doesn't want to say, or stopping her from saying, I don't want to serve same-sex weddings. They're stopping her for that, not because they care about speech, because they care about discrimination. Anyway, not one question about the original meaning of the First Amendment. We have to. So I was interviewed today. I'm not sorry. This is a look at me, Louis moment. I'm sorry. I was interviewed by the Christian Science Monitor today, and he's a good reporter. He's talked to me before, and this court turns on and off originalism all the time. Sometimes it matters and sometimes it doesn't. And there's no coherence to that. And there's Wednesday, big case Wednesday, independent state legislature doctrine, expect originalist questions. Why then, but not today? There's no good reason for that. So that's something to talk about. At the end of the day, Pete, I am curious about your opinion. So I'm turning the tables on you now. So we have someone who wants to design a website with their own personal flair. That feels to me like protected expression under the First Amendment. And she does not want to endorse or in any way help same-sex weddings because of her religious views, but this case only involves speech. She does not want to speak that way. Colorado feels strong that she should serve all customers who come to her without regard to their race, gender, religion, sexual orientation. How would you decide the case, Pete? It's not easy. You and I talked about this in the pod. No one can make you do a comedy stand-up routine for a group you don't want to do it for. Like, that's just not a thing.
Well, and as I said, it's a simple negotiation. You can tell me. We can name a price.
Seriously, how would you decide this case?
I think that you have to. I have no idea. Because it seems so specific to. You could think of all these other hypothetical situations where anybody could be in a situation where they would be being forced to perform a job, a service, or in this case, they're going to an expression that they don't want to.
Right. So we all agree selling widgets is not expression. We agree on that. So a widget company is not allowed to say, I'm not going to serve same-sex weddings. That's illegal. Everybody agrees. Everybody who thinks same-sex weddings will be, are constitutionally required, which is all reasonable people. All right. So widgets are not expression. Obviously, a poet is expression. You can't make a poet write a poem they don't want to write. Full stop. I think a stand-up comedian is expression. You can't make a stand-up comic express something they don't want to express. Website wedding designer. Someone made the point to me today that the court does treat commercial speech a little differently than political speech.
Yeah.
And this is more commercial speech than political speech. Although she wants to put on her website, same-sex couples don't apply to me. I don't do same-sex weddings. Colorado said she cannot put that on her website.
Stop tapping your desk. Yeah, Colorado says...
tapping my desk. Sorry. I got to move my hands.
I know. Colorado says that she can't do that, right? I got to let my dog in.
And that's saying she can't say what she wants to say. What's happening right now?
Letting the dog in.
Did I offend you? I offended him. I've never offended Pete before. Well, one time I talked about Sarah Palin.
My dog wouldn't stop barking outside the shed. So what is the outcome of today? How do you think they're going to decide?
A very smart law professor tweeted at one point, a lot of people were live tweeting today. There were probably 5 of us at least that I saw, maybe 8 law professors live tweeting this argument.
Yeah.
And he said, why do that? Because we know how it's going to come out. And yes, we do. The court is going to rule for her. Now, as I said on your podcast, my friend Mike Dorff wrote a thing saying how they rule for her is very important. They can rule very broadly, which would be bad, or they could rule very narrowly, which would be less bad. That question I can't answer, but she is going to win. There's no question. By the way, a couple other observations. Neil Gorsuch has a fantastic radio voice. I hate the son of a bitch, but he has a great radio voice. Maybe the best of any justice I've heard during these live streaming things.
How come you're not saying much about the kind of things that were said by, especially by Alito, joking about with Justice Elena Kagan, maybe being familiar with the website Ashley Madison and JDate?
Because I can't do any better than Dahlia did, and people should go read her piece. Sorry, I'm not as good at that as she is, and she did a great job. But
what is your reaction? What is your emotional reaction?
Well, you know what? Well, so I am beyond. So Dobbs, the draft when Dobbs came out last year, and the draft opinion didn't change in any significant way. So first we had the draft opinion. Yeah. Everybody went ballistic.
The leak. Yeah.
And then the end opinion ended up being the same, effectively, and using the same horrible rhetoric, citing witch burners, etc. There is nothing Justice Alito can do other than maybe intentional first-degree murder to make me think less of him. He is a terrible person. He's an awful, terrible, degenerate, racist, sexist, bigot person. So when he does things like talk about black kids wearing Ku Klux Klan outfits, he's projecting there. I'm going to say something controversial. When he talks about black kids wearing Ku Klux Klan outfits, what he's really. I'll just use the word projection and go on from there.
Yeah.
He says and does terrible things all the time. Mike Dorf's wife, Sherry Kolb, who was a law professor at Cornell and a fantastic person who has left us, who passed this fall. And we knew she was going to pass, she had cancer. She wrote a series of blog posts about Alito that are so good. And he's always been terrible. I think I already mentioned to you Planned Parenthood versus KC, the really big abortion case the court overturned. In the lower court, there was a provision of that Pennsylvania law requiring wives to notify their husbands if they're going to get an abortion, with certain exceptions. Every judge in the lower court who heard that struck it down, except Alito.
Yeah.
He was terrible in 1990. He's terrible today. I don't want to really waste that much more time on it.
Well, that's because he's living in 1690, and he would like to bring us back there. All right. Well, that is. Go ahead.
Let me finish up with one serious thing. Anyone who tells you this case is easy, you shouldn't listen to. Okay. This is not an easy case for either side. Right. It is complicated and it is hard. So my default position, which I think is a reasonable one, is when we're dealing with. And I feel this way about abortion, affirmative action, everything. First, free speech, everything. When reasonable people can disagree about how a case should come out, then Colorado gets to do what Colorado wants to do. And Colorado thinks stopping discrimination is more important than the commercial speech relevant to this case. I can't say they're wrong. I can't say they're right, but I can't say they're wrong. Given that, judges should stand down. It's not just stand down. Let the voters can change this tomorrow. The voters of Colorado can change this tomorrow and change the law. That's what the court should say. Not our business. You guys figure it out.
All right.
You don't seem happy with me, Pete.
No, I see him. I'm very happy with you. I'm very happy with your analysis. I appreciate you joining me to give it to me tonight. I thought spending about as much time as we did talking about it would be an important recap, and we should always do this whenever there's these arguments, and then it's going to happen again Wednesday, right?
Wednesday's cases, LGBTQ rights are unbelievably important to me, to the country. I'm not denigrating them in any way when I say, and Colorado thinks they're really important.
When you say Wednesday's case is about the future of America's democracy.
Well done, Pete. Yep.
Yeah,
it's about the future of our country. So is this case today, but that case is about the very future of our country.
Flying cars or no flying cars. That's what's at stake, right?
That's not fair. I've tweeted many times that I did not want to die without flying cars.
Well, they have them now. You haven't seen these, basically they're drones.
I can't fit in them, and I'm not a big person.
If you're like at the end of your life and I can rent one of these and take you up in it, you'll go with me and I'll fly it.
100%.
I've always
wanted to be on a Jetson car, although I'd have to know what you did in the 3 hours preceding the event.
Probably enough drugs to make it a little bit more fun.
Then no, my friend. Then you know what I wish, Pete?
We're live on Twitter. This isn't being taped. Let's not get too familiar.
This could be bad.
Go ahead.
I wish, I'm looking at myself and you, and I wish I could take my eyebrows and put them on your head. That's what I wish. And
It's a bizarre impulse.
I have too much eyebrow.
Yeah.
And you don't have enough hair, to be honest.
You want to put your eyebrows on my head so I can comb them up over. Yeah. Listen,
I just hate my eyebrows. I hate looking at myself.
I love my face and my head. I think I'm a perfect looking person.
I think your eyebrows are much better than mine.
They are my strong suit. It was my favorite thing about COVID was wearing a mask and a hat. Everybody thought I was really attractive because right in here, woo, I'm an 8.
That's what I mean. And right in here, I'm awful. Like I look like some freak.
You look like an old dwarf. Yeah.
Okay, height jokes aren't allowed.
No, I wasn't saying that. I was saying, the face of one. All right.
Is anybody still listening to
I love you. Thank you very, very much for joining me. That was awesome.
Great, Pete. Thanks.
Right.
Nice. Happy to do it. Talk to you soon.
All right, there he goes. Eric Siegel live on Twitter yesterday. You can watch that conversation. I should have mentioned that earlier if you want on either one of our Twitter handles. He's at eSpinSiegel on Twitter. Thanks again to Aaron David Miller, as well, of course, to Jeff Charlotte, and to everybody who listened all the way to the end. You guys are the greatest. Did 90 minutes today. 3 guests. Can't do it without you. Sign up for a paid subscription right now. StandUpWithPete.com so I can put my daughters through college and support my family. Uphold my end of the deal. StandUpWithPete.com right now. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. That's it for today. John Carroll taking us out. Mara Quint will join us at the Thursday night hangout. What else can I tell you? That's it. That's all. Thank you. Love you guys. Bye-bye.
Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you gotta stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You gotta stand up. That's right. You got to rise up, you got to stand up, you got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up, stand up. Point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw the land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right. We got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.